Good morning, grade 5 students. This week we're going to discuss lesson 5, declaring independence. And now is just the part 1 of this lesson. All right, the learning objective is to understand the people and events associated with the Declaration of Independence. This lesson class describes why colonial leaders wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence and some of that document's key ideas. Let me introduce first grade 5, the vocabulary words of this lesson. Number 1 is independence. I believe we already discussed this word several times from our previous lesson. But when you say independence class, it is the freedom to govern on one's own, or a country gets its independence when it is no longer part of another country. Right? And number 2, we have the word resolution, means a formal group statement, or it is like a plan for something to be done. All right, and number 3, we have declaration or unofficial statement or announcement. Example of declaration is a government statements about a new law. Number 4, we have preamble or an introduction or first part. It is actually, class, a brief introduction to the Constitution's purposes. For example, look at this part. We the people means all the citizens of the United States. This is an example or the first few words of the preamble of the United States Constitution. And last one, we have grievance, means a complaint, or it is an unjust or unfair act. All right, so again, we have the word independence, resolution, declaration. Number 4 is preamble, and 5, grievance. Moving toward independence. The current focus of this part of the lesson, grade 5, is that the Second Continental Congress decided to write a Declaration of Independence from Britain. More colonists were starting to think that their problems with Britain could not be settled. One person who helped shape the colonists' ideas was Thomas Paine. He wrote that the colonists should rule themselves. So we're going to find out, students, how the Congress debates independence. From Georgia to New Hampshire, people talk about Paine's ideas. So many people began to call for independence or the freedom to govern themselves. Also, the delegates at the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia, which is the largest city of Pennsylvania, also started to talk about independence. John Adams, grade 5 of Massachusetts, argued strongly for it. He said that independence was the only way for the colonists to have liberty or freedom. And then on June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia slowly rose from his chair at the Second Continental Congress. He told that other delegates that the 13 colonies no longer owed loyalty to the king. Lee then called for a resolution. When you say resolution, again, it is a formal group statement of independence, and it says, resolve that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. All right, by the way, grade 5, look at the map again, and these are the 13 colonies. So we have Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. A declaration is written. It was mentioned earlier, class, that Richard Henry Lee called for a resolution. So the Congress debated or had a formal discussion about his resolution. It also chose a committee to write a declaration or official statement about independence to be sent to the king. The committee, grade 5, asked Thomas Jefferson of Virginia to write the first draft or a rough preliminary sketch of a piece of writing. All right, Jefferson, students, was a 33-year-old lawyer who had studied government and law. He used his knowledge to explain his ideas, and the other members of the committee also added some ideas, but Jefferson was the main author. Could you imagine grade 5? Every evening for about 17 days, he wrote and rewrote the draft of the Declaration of Independence. Now, students, it's the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson class carefully planned the Declaration of Independence. In the preamble or first part, Jefferson told why the Declaration was needed. He also explained why the colonists had the right to break away from Britain and form a new nation. So students were going to find out the reasons why the colonists were separating from British government and presented the colonists' main ideas about government. So let's start with rights and grievances. The next part of the Declaration of Independence describes the colonists' main ideas about government. It also states that all people have certain rights that governments cannot take away. Jefferson wrote that people have the right to live, to be free, and seek their own happiness. Okay, and look at this part. The longest part of the Declaration, students, lists the colonists' grievances or complaints against King George III and Parliament or the British government. It also lists the ways the colonists had tried to settle their differences with Britain peacefully. And then in the last part of the Declaration class, Jefferson stated that the colonies were free and independent states. Okay, and look at this picture. This mural shows class that Thomas Jefferson handling a draft of the Declaration of Independence to John Hancock. Now, grade 5, look at this document. This is the Declaration of Independence. This important document class includes the idea that a government gets its power from the consent of the people. But I would like to tell you that the signers of the Declaration were taking a great risk. They knew that the British government would view such action as treason or against the government, which was punishable by death. All right, and then in number 5, look at the charges against the king. The Declaration of Independence class listed some grievances of the colonies, if you still remember. One was taxation without representation. Another was forcing the colonists to quarter British soldiers. All right, and you can see the preamble, which is the beginning part of the Declaration of Independence. Then the rights were stated and also the Statement of Independence. Congress approves the Declaration. When Thomas Jefferson class finished writing, he gave his draft of the Declaration of Independence to Congress. On June 28, it was read aloud to the delegates, and on July 2, the delegates voted to approve Richard Henry Lee's resolution to cut ties with Britain. All right, the colonists now thought of themselves as independent states that they felt they were free to make their own laws. On July 4, 1776 class, Congress voted to accept the Declaration's final wording. And then 4 days later, on July 8, large crowds gathered outside the Pennsylvania State House. Today, it's called Independence Hall. Bells rang out, and Colonel John Nixon gave the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence. And then also the members of the Second Continental Congress listened as Nixon read. News of the Declaration quickly spread across the former colonies. Many people class who supported independence tore down pictures and statues of King George III. They sang songs, rang bells, and fired cannons in celebration. John Adams was so pleased when he heard these celebrations that he wrote about this in a letter to his wife Abigail Adams. He said that Independence Day should be celebrated by succeeding generations from this time forward. All right, class, so that's the first part of the lesson, and for the part two, we're going to discuss more about a dangerous decision and forming a new government. All right, so I hope you've learned something. Bye for now.